everyone, it's Helen here from Bodywork-Pilates, and I just wanted to do a short video about something that we talk about in class a lot, which is opposition, elongation and length. We use these in class because that little bit of extra activity really feeds into our movements. So I just wanted to run through a couple of examples of how we can use that. So the first example is simply lying down. So I'm going to take my usual lying position on my mat. I've got my feet and my knees hip distance apart. My shoulders are widened and drawn down. The back of my neck is long. And my hands are just going to rest on the floor at the side of the body. Now, obviously I'm going to make sure that my head's in the right position. I'm going to do all the usual stuff just to make sure that my neck is released. And a feeling of just slightly drawing the shoulders down, but we definitely don't want to jam. Now, we're going to talk about creating the curve in the back of the body, that natural curve of the low back. And there really is no formula for this. There's no formula for it at all, really. And it does vary from person to person and from day to day. So very often you'll see people teaching an imprint and then an overarch like this. I always think, particularly if it's cold, it's a bit like doing that with a credit card, and it can feel a little bit forceful. I don't really like that. Now, that's not to say I wouldn't do an imprint, that's great, but I would then encourage you to just press the pubic bone away. So we create this space at the front edge of the body that naturally creates the curvature of the back of the body. Okay, so we can imprint and then press, opening up the space at the front of the body. Now, this takes us into something that I talk about a lot, which is our bony landmarks. So the bony landmarks of the pubic bone in relation to the breastbone, the hip bones in relation to the ribs. And as I imprint my back, I naturally draw my lower bony landmarks towards my upper bony landmarks, but I've not moved my upper bony landmarks. And then I recreate that space again by putting a little opposition into it, by pressing the pubic bone forward, but not so much that I feel I'm pulling too much space between those points. So I'm just pressing it forward and recreating that lightening of the load against the floor through my lower back, that soft curve. Okay, if I was to do a curl, so if I was to curl from my head and my shoulders, I would slide my upper bony landmarks, my ribs and my breastbone, down towards my lower bony landmarks. So again, I would be shortening those distances. But then as I came back down, I'm keeping my pubic bone pressing forward, and I'm trying to recreate again that sense of space. All right, now, assuming that we've done everything we need to do to find whatever curvature we have in the lower back today, let my hands rest, and I'm not going to cue a corset connection. I'm not going to ask anybody to take a wrapping, a corset, although we know that that's perfectly relevant. Okay, I'm going to ask you instead to just glide your hands down the mat, to take your fingers towards your heels. Now again, it's not a really harsh jamming down, because if you think about it, it's no more natural to have your shoulders pulling down as hard as possible as it is to have them pulled right up onto your ears. So somewhere between the two, there's an activity that just puts them a little bit lower than perhaps you might hold them when you're cold or tired or whatever it might be. Okay, so once again, taking myself back to my position, okay, and without doing anything else, I'm simply going to initiate a slight glide of the fingers down towards the heels. Now, that has immediately engaged my deeper abdominal muscles. So almost like I've tightened my corset, but I've not done that. My body has recognized the activity and done it for me. So it's applied that automatic corset, what I call an automatic corset. And I can feel that, and as I continue to just slightly reach my hands forward, if I was to go into something like an alternate leg extension, as we do in our backstroke movement, okay, I'm keeping my pelvis level and still, I'm keeping the distance between my bony landmarks, and keeping the balance through the back of the pelvis, or the only thing I've done differently is I've just put a little bit of activity in the length of my arms. I've put some distance between my fingertips and my shoulder. And I've just eased that down. I've not changed anything else. But if I was to relax that, now as soon as I relax that, I feel my back change as well. So as soon as I relax that and then I do my leg extension, I don't feel nearly the activity. Okay, now I can hold my pelvis still because I'm quite used to doing this, and for me it's not a particularly heavy move, but for some people, not being cued to apply that corset, they might find that they move around a little bit, but simply by just applying some activity into the arms immediately gives me more activity around that supportive corset. So that's a really, really simple way of playing around with that and recognising that sense of opposition, that distance. Now, another simple exercise to practice this in is your side bend, your seated side bend, as opposed to your side lift. Just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to sit in this, although in class we could well take it into mermaid or deer. Okay, that's not for everybody, but you know, we would probably aim for that. But just for the moment, I'm going to sit, I've got my feet flat to the floor, and I want to get that feeling of being lengthened. So I'm looking for the same distances through the front edge of my body that I had a moment ago when I was lying down. Now again, you'll hear other people talking about a helium balloon lifting the crown of the head, or a piece of string lifting. And that doesn't work for me. And the reason it doesn't work for me is because it just identifies one thing. It's just lifting the head. And actually, I want to create a whole sense of lift and length. So we're going to really consider anchoring the pelvis down. Okay, so like your pelvis is set in stone into the ground, and then creating almost a rebounding action. So as you press down, there's then an opposition of reaction that then lifts you up out of the hips, out of the waist, out of the ribs, and through the neck, and through finally to the crown of the head. Okay, otherwise I get the feeling that I'm just trying to lift my head off my shoulders and nothing else. All right, so we've got that sense of length of lift, because again we've aimed for this distance and this openness at the front edge of the body. Just by sitting here, okay, with my chin slightly retracted, okay, I can feel that automatic corset. So I haven't had to apply it, just by being here, and I'm not in a difficult position, you know, I'm sitting essentially on a chair, then I can feel that my body has recognised that there's activity required. I'm going to bring my fingers down onto the carriage, and as I look forward, my fingers are just in the very bottom of my peripheral vision. Okay, so I've not taken them back in line with my hips. Okay, I've just brought them marginally forward, so I know where they're going. There's no rotation in this movement. So I'm going to let my right arm lift up. Okay, now this is where again we need to think of that distance, that distancing. I want to keep my shoulder down as my arm lengthens. Okay, I'm keeping the same amount of length in the waist here, and I want to imagine now that there's a bar on the opposite side. And as I anchor down into my right hip and open up through the right waist, through my right ribs, my right underarm, okay, I'm coming up and over the bar at my left side. I'm not leaning into my hands, I'm not lifting, okay, I'm lengthening in order to side bend, and then bring it back to center and bring it back down. Okay, so again, arm comes up, shoulder slides down, so we maintain this length in the neck. So it's all about length and openness. Okay, I anchor down through my pelvis evenly on both sides. Okay, and I'm going to imagine now I've got a bar here and I want to come up and over that bar, just to feel myself opening at the waist. And essentially I'm taking my bony landmarks away from each other here. Okay, so I'm drawing my ribs away from my hips into this side bend and then back to center. Okay, so in order to create that sense of difference, of elongation, of opposition, you have to create an anchor. Okay, and in this case, my pelvis is my anchor, and then I want to move away from my anchor. Now, my anchor is no good to me if it's sloppy. Okay, nobody wants a sloppy anchor. Okay, so I need to really stabilize. This is much easier to do when you're sat like this than when you take the deer leg position or the mermaid position, whichever you prefer. Okay, but again, it's not just about this. I then also have to think about the length and elongation in my neck. I need to think about the length and the elongation in my arm. So it all ties together, but through none of that, I had to consciously apply a corset. My body automatically did that. So if you can get into the habit of using that sense of distancing from one point to the next, you may find that you don't have to think so much about applying your corset, which is one less thing to think about, and you can concentrate even more on the actual movement itself. So as I say, we talk about that a lot in classes. I call it opposition, it's elongation, it's lengthening, it's opening, it's creating spaciousness within the body, however you want to term it. Okay, and if you've got any questions about it, then just get in touch. But otherwise, just try it on just a couple of your movements and see whether it changes the movement. And maybe try it with that sense of lengthening and opposition, and then try it again without, and notice if there's any discrepancy, any differences on that. All right then, speak to you all soon. Take care.